Welcome to the Sports Ethicist Show, coming to you from the basement of Burpee on the campus of Rockford University in Sportstown, USA, Rockford, Illinois. I am Shaine Klein, the Sports Ethicist. The Sports Ethicist Show discusses the many ethical and philosophic issues that arise in and around sport. You can read the Sports Ethicist blog at sportsethicist.com, where you can also download podcasts of previous shows, subscribe to the podcast, or find links to related information. The Sports Ethicist is also on Facebook and Twitter, and you can email the show at sportsethicist@gmail.com. The Winter Olympics start soon. The Super Bowl is right around the corner. Now, for the athletes competing in these are the biggest stakes, the highest points of their sporting career. The challenge and competition they face is the toughest, is the strongest that they've probably ever faced in their careers. And they play in front of millions, and their success or failure is broadcast to the world. Now, I fold if I get too much of a lead in racquetball when I'm just playing with my friends. So I'm always amazed at how these athletes can keep it together under such pressure, under such conditions, and how they don't let it get to them and how they're able to succeed. And some of them are even, it fuels their success. And of course, then there are examples of those where it doesn't seem to work well for them under those conditions. So that's the topic for today, the psychology of mental toughness and resilience in sport performance. And joining the show to discuss this with me is Shaine Henert. Dr. Henert is the academic chair and associate professor at Rock Valley College's Fitness, Wellness, and Sport program. He earned his PhD from the University of Minnesota in 2000, and among many other courses, he teaches both sociology of sport and exercise psychology. Welcome to the show, Shaine.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've been talking about doing this for a while, having you on the show, and so I'm glad we finally were able to schedule a time
me too.
To do it.
I'm glad this worked out.
So to get things rolling, I thought you could say what is meant by mental toughness and resilience. These are concepts that you hear on ESPN or on pregame shows. Oh, he's mentally tough. You got to be mentally tough, and they get thrown around a little bit. But there's something there that's real, and so psychology is a field that really studies that. And so I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about what these concepts are. How do we operationalize them? How do we understand them?
Sure. Mental toughness or resilience, really mental toughness is a form of resilience, is one of the main goals of the consulting and the sports psychology consulting that we do with athletes. And the idea here is that we're applying psychological skills that we've taken from other fields like psychology and helping people manage their anxiety, help improve their performance. We also want to improve the enjoyment or enhance the enjoyment that they experience from sport in this case. So It's not just getting better or enhancing performance, but we want them to feel a sense of self-satisfaction. And
yeah, if you're feeling really anxious, that's going to undermine some of the enjoyment.
Yeah, even if you're winning, you're winning, but I'm feeling really stressed about this. That could lead to burnout, and then they may discontinue their sport participation. So we really want to help them improve their performance, but also really enjoy what they're doing as well. And I think all of what we're focusing on in sports psychology in terms of working with athletes is helping them develop mental toughness or that resilience. We find that what separates athletes from the youth sports levels to the recreational levels up the ranks to the elite levels, like our Olympic international athletes and our pro football players, as well as other successful professional athletes, is that mental component. Mm-hmm. And most of them have learned along the way that they are physically gifted. They have a genetic makeup that allows them to throw, catch, run better than most everybody else.
Right.
But as they go up the ranks, they notice that others, it funnels down to fewer and fewer of them at the higher ranks, are as good or in some cases better than them physically. And what helps them stay at that level and continue to become better is the mental component of the game.
Right.
And I think realizing that they are going to have some setbacks, they are going to have some adversity along the way, but understanding that could be a part of their growth and development, is working through those setbacks and those adversities that occur to them. And that really is that's where they're developing their mental toughness while they're continuing to enhance their physical sport performance.
So it's when we're thinking about this resilience, this toughness, it's really a kind of a measure if that's the right way to say it, a measure of how they respond to the pressure, or is it solely how they respond to a negative situation, or is it how they respond? Because you mentioned the anxiety that one might feel even when they're winning.
Right.
So is it just a negative situation, or just any sort of pressure or stress situation, how they respond to that?
That's a good question. It's not just adversity. I mentioned adversity, but it's also dealing with pressure. And pressure can be, as you know, positive and negative. It all really depends on, and we talk a lot about this in psychology, is the individual's perception. You and I might perceive the same challenge very differently based on our abilities, our experiences, our coping skills that we have. And so I can perceive different situations to be good amount of pressure, like it makes me nervous, but nervous in a good way. Like I feel like, I'm amped up, I'm focusing, I'm ready to go, I'm mentally and physically alert.
Right.
Versus, holy crap,
it's too much.
I can feel my heart racing. My mind is all over the place, and this is too much pressure, and it's going to adversely affect my performance.
And what's I wonder, and I don't know this, not being a biologist or anything, or a psychologist, if in those two situations the biological response, the heart rate, the what other kinds of things would be going on, whatever release of certain hormones and stuff.
Sure. Yep.
Those might even be very, very much in the same range, but I could be this is too much and fold, or go into a coping mechanisms that is going to undermine my performance.
Right.
Whereas that could be something they're used to. No, this is perfect. This is right where I want. Even though biologically it might be similar. Does that sound right?
Yeah. It is, because it's that interaction of our physiological reactions, which are automatic or autonomic, and that our heart rate's going to increase, our breathing rate's going to increase, we begin to sweat and perspire. But then the mental or cognitive component is, well, how do I interpret that?
Right.
Do I interpret that as being a positive thing? And you find with elite level athletes, they still get nervous.
Sure.
But they interpret that nervousness as being a good thing. It's preparing them for competition and making sure they're ready to go for that game. Versus an athlete who's maybe less experienced or has less confidence in their ability, and they interpret the same physiological indicators as being a bad thing.
Right.
They're like, oh, I'm not ready for this. I'm overwhelmed. I'm doubting myself.
Right.
I can't concentrate now.
And they spiral out.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because not being an elite athlete, I don't have that experience.
Yeah, me either.
But, we both teach classes, and, we can have anywhere from 20, 40 more students in a class.
Yep.
And get up there, and it's public speaking. Most people are definitely afraid of public speaking.
Sure.
I don't like public speaking, and I remember from being a kid, in elementary school and high school, having to give presentations.
Sure.
And I mean, I have a moment in my mind from third grade having to give a weather report. And this is just, I don't have a great memory. Anyone in my family will tell you. They joke, I'm the butt of many jokes about Shaine doesn't remember last week, let alone third grade. But I have this distinct memory up until the point of giving the presentation where it just sort of blacks out.
Yeah.
And then similarly in college, having to give a presentation for a foreign language class I was taking, and wasn't very good at it, and just awful. But now I go into a classroom and teach, and it's not a negative experience like those experiences were.
Right.
Even though, I still get the butterflies in the stomach.
Right.
My heart races before class. I still get, the breath, shortness of breath right before, and then I step in, and then I'm fine. And I think part of it is that, so two concepts that I think are really important for this mental toughness, this resilience, is the confidence aspect of it.
Sure.
Having the confidence, which I think comes from experience. Right. My first time teaching was not like that. Right. It was more like the blackout.
Yeah.
And maybe having those previous negative experiences was and surviving them.
Yeah.
Maybe okay. Well, even if it's as bad as that,
it's not the end of the world.
I'll still get through it.
Yeah.
And that leads to the second. So you have the confidence, but then the second is, as you were already talking about, is the interpretation or the perception of the experience.
Right.
Right. So how do you read it? Do you read it as an opportunity, as something that is enhancing, or do you read it as something that is a lack or failure or
a threat,
a block, or some sort of or something that's temporary? Okay, this happens in the beginning. It's right before I get into the classroom, or right at the beginning of the game. I'm always a little amped up. It's just temporary. After the first hit or the first sentence I get out of my mouth, then I'm fine. Right. Whereas I think someone who has a perception of it as being permanent, I'm nervous and I'm going to be nervous the whole time. Then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
So we have the perception and the confidence.
Right.
So those might be 2 points on which to try that psychologists probably try to focus on when they try to manage someone who has issues with this.
Yeah, and really you touched on really 4 components of mental toughness or resilience as most of us in sports psychology see, and that is the idea of control. And one of them is, do I feel like I have control over my emotional responses, my physiological responses? Do I have control over my performance? Do I have control over my ability to get better at this? And we found that those people have more of an internal locus of control, who do have a sense that I know that if I go to practice, if I listen to what coach says, if I can get through this worst experience and learn from it and move on, that tends to help them develop their mental toughness.
Okay.
So having that sense of control is one important aspect. And one of the other ones that you mentioned is challenge. Having viewing competitions or training or tryouts as an opportunity for me to succeed, or an opportunity for me to display my skills, or an opportunity in the case of the Olympics to see how I measure up to the best in the world. If I view it that way, if my perception is I see this as an opportunity to succeed versus as a threat to me personally, that develops and helps you strengthen your mental toughness. And that's something that's going to come with experience, but it's also going to come with setting goals and achieving those goals. And while you're doing that, that also helps develop another area of mental toughness, which is confidence, which is something you mentioned as well. In confidence and having that strong sense of self-belief, or as social learning theorists would say, self-efficacy. In the case of your teaching, I experienced the same thing. We develop our self-efficacy. One of the main sources of that is succeeding.
Right.
Even though you get through a bad experience and you have a good experience and you get better and more confident, just that experience is going to help you feel more confident in that situation. Just like athletes who've been playing the sport for the majority of their life, and they've all had ups and downs, but those experiences have helped develop their self-efficacy, which is really just a situation-specific form of self-confidence.
Right. I can do this. I can be effective. My action is going to have an impact and do something.
Yeah.
Right.
This is a foreign place to me, whether it's somebody else's field or gym or wherever it might be, or mountain for that matter. But I've done this before, and I've done this at different places before. And I have fallen before, but I've also come back from a failure and been able to redeem myself. And so those are the things that help develop self-confidence that can help you focus on the event at hand.
All right. That's interesting. It makes me, I keep thinking about classroom experience, because that's my main domain of existence. And I'm thinking of students who have trouble participating in class out of being just shy. They don't want to ask questions, and I'm sure you have these same students. They, when you press them, they have great things to say.
Sure.
They have they pick up on things in the text or in the class discussion, but they never offer it up. They don't ask questions. You ask them afterwards, why don't you ask questions? And I don't think of it in class. So one of the things that I've done over the years is tell the students, write down a question before class.
Right.
Have it with you in class, and if a moment comes up where it seems relevant, or if there's a break in the class and I say, are there any questions? Then you have it there. It's written down, so you don't have to, come up with it from scratch. It's right there. And then you ask it. And if you do that, you're not going to necessarily get a question in every time, but you'll ask the question, and then you'll start to see, I can do this.
Yeah.
I can ask a question, No one's going to laugh at me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to fumble over my words. And we'll move on. And I've seen that work with some students that actually do it. I mean, I've talked to students that don't do it, and so it doesn't work. Right. But the ones who, like you said, listen to their coach. When the students who do that do listen to me, they begin to open up, and I think it has to do with that confidence, that sense of efficacy. When I ask a question, I get a response, and the response is a positive response, and it helps build on that.
And I think in the sporting realm, that's one of the important roles of a coach, is trying to help that athlete grow and challenge themselves beyond what they believe they can do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also an important source of self-efficacy, self-confidence, is not just your experiences, but the persuasion or influence of significant others in your life. In this case, a coach or friend or teammate or family member.
Right.
And I think that can be extremely helpful. Same situation, that coach who's more experienced in not only the physical aspect of the sport, but the psychological aspect of the sport, understands that there's something in there that I can draw out of that person that they may not even be aware of. In the same case in the student who's not even thinking, I have a question or I could ask a question. In sports, there is that, that confidence or that concentration or that focus that's perhaps there under the surface, and it just needs that coach or someone to draw that out, which helps improve their self-confidence as well. And
then you also mentioned goals, and so I wanted to come back to that, because I think, I wonder, in terms of helping to build confidence and efficacy, the role of goals in there, because I can imagine someone setting goals that are unrealistic and thereby failing at that is going to undermine their confidence, their sense of, I did something, it didn't work. So their sense of efficacy and even worth is going to be potentially damaged in that situation by setting unrealistic goals.
Right.
And so is that an important part of the sort of resilience literature or consulting process of being not, you don't want low goals either, because then it's too easy. So you're not going to feel very effective or confidence because you've set it too low. So you're not going to feel like, when I get a real challenge, you're going to fold. So you need to find that sweet spot of what's a realistic goal. So is that part of it?
It is. I think one of the two most common mistakes that athletes and non-athletes alike make in terms of setting goals is, one, they set unrealistic goals, and two, they set too many goals.
That too, yeah.
And every individual athlete or every team of athletes I've ever worked with, we have always worked on goal setting. And what I've learned along the way is that most people don't realize that setting goals and achieving goals is a systematic process. Most people's experiences have been, a New Year's resolution that, December 31st, I've got to come up with this idea of something I'm going to accomplish, but I'm not going to write it down. I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm not going to formulate a plan of how I'm going to accomplish this on a day-by-day and month-by-month basis. I'm just going to have this good idea in my head, or what we would call a dream goal. Something that I want to accomplish. And I think all of us, most of us, if not all of us, have a dream goal of something we want to accomplish.
I want to write a book, but then I never sit down and actually write a page.
Or have a plan of how I'm going to do some research or, a goal to have done. So in my consulting, and I've worked with college athletes, youth sport athletes, and high school athletes, is especially when it's with a team. When it's a team, we always start with goal setting. And I have them think of a dream goal. What is it you want to get out of this season? Or out of this sport, or whatever it is. And then I say, I want you to write that down. And then I want you to explain to yourself why that's a SMART goal. And they'll think, well, it's a SMART goal because it's a good goal. And I say, no, I want you to tell me why it's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-based. And that's where my SMART comes from. It's my acronym for the guidelines for setting goals. And I really have added to that lately. I call them smarten up goals, and the U and the P would be updating those goals and stating them in positive phrases.
I'm writing this down because I want to apply it to my own life. It's great.
So these are, I think most people in our field and people of psychology and performance are familiar with SMART goals. They've been around forever. And I added the U and the P because I found another common mistake that people make with their goals is they don't come back to them and look at them again and say, have I accomplished this? And if I have accomplished it, I should celebrate.
Right.
I should reward myself for accomplishing this goal. Not everybody can say that. And if I've accomplished it, should I set another one? Or should I make this even more challenging for myself?
Right.
And I think that's where you'll find that your elite athletes, your higher level athletes, are continually doing that.
Right.
Whether they're writing it down or just have it in their mind, they're setting these goals for themselves. They're accomplishing these goals, developing their confidence, and then saying, hey, if I can do this, I bet I could also take a shot at that.
Right.
It's a little bit harder, and maybe before I didn't think I could, or before I wasn't even thinking about it, and that's what helps them to continue to excel, at levels where the competition is so fierce. And
you definitely hear that in press conferences and things like that. That phone's ringing. I didn't know it would do that.
Tom Brady's calling.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, Brady, Belichick, they're always talking about their team goals.
Yeah.
And the start of the semester, the goals that they had in the beginning of the semester, and that this is one part of our goal, and we have more goals to achieve.
Yep.
And so they're always focused on that, and I think that's probably part of their success.
Yeah.
Is because they do think about those and think and look at the ways in which, what are the steps, and having goals along the way, or recognizing having an action plan, having what are the steps that I'm going to need in order to achieve this. Because again, coming back to the classroom, I can think of talking with students. Well, what do you want? I want an A. Okay, well, what's it going to take to get an A? You got to show up to class. You got to do the work. You got to do the work well. And but a lot of times there's that breakdown. They just want the A.
Yeah.
They want the dream goal.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't think about what it takes to get through it, or they don't follow up with it. They might start off, but then by the end, and then they come to you. What can I do now?
Yeah. Do you offer any extra credit?
Right. Do you have any extra credit? What can I do now to get an A? Well, do you have a time machine? But it's
And I think that process that when I work with athletes that they go through helps them develop the skill to develop realistic goals. Because I don't think that's something that we're necessarily born with. I don't think that's a skill that most of us are born with, to really have the capacity to develop realistic goals, even if we're good at something.
Yeah.
Because we may be questioning ourselves or not real sure. We just haven't developed that skill. And then by updating them, it gives us a much better idea of what's realistic for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why those self-set goals, when I work with athletes, I have them set goals and have them analyze themselves. And certainly the coach or myself will give them some guidance or direction if maybe it needs to be, maybe we need to move it down a notch, maybe depending on what we know about their past performances and their current status.
What about raising it up? Do people tend to undershoot
higher.
it? Okay.
Most of them will undershoot it.
Okay.
Yeah, I've worked with, I have stories of working with some college Big Ten champions, All-Americans, who didn't like writing goals.
Mm-hmm.
And in one particular instance, it was a sprint swimmer. She was afraid that she wouldn't accomplish it.
All right.
So she saw these goals, even though in her head she wanted to accomplish these goals. She didn't want to write them down because for her, I don't know if that made her feel like, it was too much of a commitment to write them down. And what if I don't accomplish this? And I don't want to feel bad about that. I think it might have been a defense mechanism to protect herself and her ego. And a very talented athlete. I think most of us knew that she would win Big Tens, and there was no surprise when she was an All-American. But the idea of writing them down and having them in black and white in front of her that somebody else might see was intimidating for her.
So how'd you guys work through that?
I just made her do it.
You just do it. Just do it. And
what I did is I let her write them down, but I said, you don't have to show it to me or anybody else unless you want to.
Okay.
So you just hold on to it. I just write one down. Don't write, more than that. Just write one down. And if you want to share it with me in the privacy of my office or whatever, I want to share it with a friend, then that's fine. And she did eventually share it with me, and she ended up accomplishing that goal. And I think that was an experience that I hopefully was able to teach her that she could then use after that in sport and in life. And that if you write something down and try and shoot towards it, it feels really good when you accomplish it. And sometimes we don't. But that's where I think you come back and you revise the goal.
Right.
We can't be expected to be perfect at setting realistic goals.
Right. And I think having that revision aspect is important because, when you write something down, there's something scary about that, right? Because it's there. It's in black and white. It's right there. Even if it's just on a computer screen, it's there. Yeah. And that concrete aspect of it does give it more reality.
Yeah.
And it's more of a commitment to it.
Yeah.
And so it is, I could see that as a defense mechanism to say, well, you know, I met my goals, and if they're not written down, it's easy to lie to yourself, to lie to others.
Yes.
But if it's there and you didn't do it, everyone's going to know.
Yeah.
Most importantly, you're going to know.
Yeah.
And that's I could see that being scary, but then knowing that you can revise them, I think can help alleviate some of that, and know that you can adjust that, and that that was a goal that was too high, or this is a goal that was too low, and finding that. And so knowing that it's a skill as well. I think that that's something that's important, because I think sometimes, particularly, you know, younger person's going to approach it as, well, I'm either good at it or I'm not. And so I'm not good at writing these down, or I'm not good at that. So they just assume that they can't learn to be good at that. And so they just dismiss it. And I think that's tragic in a lot of situations.
But it does help them develop really what I consider the fourth component of mental toughness or resilience, which is commitment, that you mentioned a moment ago. And that's another very important part of mental toughness, is being able to develop one's commitment. So, you know, adding on to the sense of control that I mentioned before, the confidence that we talked about, and viewing competitions or tryouts or training as a challenge versus a threat, the fourth aspect would be commitment. And that's really where the goal setting really helps them develop that sense of commitment. And that I think many athletes would think that, well, I'm committed to this. I love basketball, or I love baseball. I go to practice. I buy all the equipment. I watch it on television all the time. I'm committed to it. But are you really? I mean, deep down, have you committed yourself, in this case, to setting some benchmarks for yourself and then trying to accomplish those? And going back to the challenge aspect of seeing these as an opportunity to be successful and to develop and grow, versus seeing them as a threat to my ego or my personality. And I think the more comfortable an athlete becomes developing that sense of commitment with those three other aspects of mental toughness, I think that also helps them develop that resilience that they're going to need to face adversity when it comes, or deal with positive or negative pressure along the way.
Now, tied into commitment and goals, what about motivation and having that sense of tied into that dream goal idea as well, and that I want this, that this is something that I want to do? Does that play a role? Because I'm thinking of times, again, of my own experience, very early on into teaching. I have a very clear memory of one time being very nervous about going into a classroom. Very early in my, and it was more of a public speaking experience, not a classroom like a semester. It was just kind of a one-off thing, and thinking to myself, well, this is something I want to do. I want to be a teacher, and focusing on that goal of a kind of a dream goal, or what is it that I want from my life. It helped calm myself down. Because I said, okay, well, this is a step along the way of something I want. I don't necessarily like this particular situation or the way I feel now, but it's just a step along the way. And if I can do this, then I can be a step closer to my goal.
Right.
And so that sense of motivation or desire for that goal, and does that play a role in the psychology of
resilience? A major role.
Yep.
In terms of developing motivation, or enhancing motivation, or just nurturing motivation, the goal setting is very important. A lot of the work that I do now focuses more on exercise psychology, where goal setting is also just as important, because it helps motivate those exercisers who don't want to exercise because they're either, tired, sore, unsure about themselves, or just inexperienced. And by having those goals written down, I think going back to monitoring your progress and updating them is just as important, because now I can see what I've accomplished so far. Whether it's exercise, or whether it's my sports training, or whether it's my competitions. I've seen that by doing these things on a week-to-week basis, that it has helped me improve my skill or improve my fitness. And those times that I'm doubting myself, or I'm not feeling real energized, or really feeling like working out, I look back at my log. I keep pointing here at the desk like you know what I'm talking about here.
And then anyone in the radio can see it.
It's like my 3-year-old son who likes to show grandma and grandpa his toys on the phone.
Oh yeah.
Like he thinks that they can see through it.
Have you done like Skype or something?
Not well. We've done with my wife's mom and dad we have. So
he might be thinking,
with my daughter especially, anytime you're on the laptop or on the computer now, she thinks that whatever you're doing is interacting with other people. So she brings things up to the computer monitor to show whoever it is that you're talking to.
Right. It's just word.
Very boring. But I think, I know that when they look back on the progress that they've made and the accomplishments that they've made along the way, that helps get them through those moments of indecision or doubting oneself of, I really owe it to myself to go work out today. I really owe it to myself to try as hard as I can when I'm really not feeling like it today, because I don't want a setback considering what I've accomplished so far.
Right. And what I want to achieve.
Yes.
And so having that sort of where you've been and where you want to go, and keeping both of those
and being able
present,
to see that progress. I've got that dream goal, but you've talked about this before. I think having that is important, especially if it really is realistic and it really is what you want to do. That will help. And I think equally important is seeing your progress. That I am continuing to make progress. I'm doing really well here. I'm getting closer and closer to my ultimate goal here. And so that's going to motivate me and help me continue on. So when we talk about motivation, goal setting is definitely an important part of helping a person develop motivation or enhance their motivation. And it's always a bit of a struggle because in athletics you have a mix of an intrinsic drive or an intrinsic motivation and an external motivation. The rewards, the adulation, the money, the trophies, or whatever it may be. And most of your very successful athletes have a nice, healthy combination of both of those. Right. It's not necessarily that we find that your highly successful athletes are all, inner motivated or have an intrinsic motivation to compete. They want to win. They want to make money. They want to get a trophy. They want to be the best at their position or the best in their sport. And so having a nice, healthy mix of both of those helps them be successful. And
similarly, it seems very few highly successful elite professional athletes have only the external goals as well. That if there isn't that internal drive, it's not going to get. It seems like a lot of times those external goals aren't going to get you through some of the rougher times.
I think especially if you've after the 12th time of getting your trophy, it lessens the value of it. The impact of it is less after you.
Although Tom Brady did say, when he they asked him after his third Super Bowl, which is his favorite. He was on like a 60 Minutes thing, and do you know what his answer was? The next one, which we're still waiting for. But maybe 4 isn't enough to have it get old. So
maybe not. I mean, if you look at the Bulls, 6 championships, and obviously the first 3 weren't enough, and so it drove them and Michael Jordan to come back and to achieve 3 more. Which
well, it's another goal. It's like, well, we've done 3, let's get another one.
Yeah, why not?
Let's see if we can't break this record and go further and do something historic that no one's ever done.
Yep.
Another thought here about, particularly as it maybe pertains to anxiety, that the feelings that one has before, right before, or even during a competition, and we've kind of touched on it, but I thought it might be worthwhile to isolate it, is a kind of concept of an acceptance. It's normal for me to feel this way. This is the way, and not even saying even that it's normal. Because that has a kind of judgment aspect to it too. Just yes, my heart is racing, and just sort of have that sort of sense of acceptance, and then and not judge it as, well, this is bad or this is good. It's it just is. That's the way my body is responding at this moment, and that's what it does. And then moving on. Is that something that is made explicit in the psychology of this stuff too?
We talk a lot about understanding. What causes you to become anxious, and is it your thoughts of the what ifs or what's going to happen, or thinking about the outcome of an event, and then better understanding your signs and symptoms of experiencing stress and anxiety and nervousness. Do I experience it more cognitively? Does my mind begin to race? Do I begin to doubt myself? Or do I experience it with butterflies, throwing up before a competition, or a combination of both of those? And really depending on how a person experiences their anxiety, we can tailor some psychological skills to help them manage it. If they've experienced their stress or anxiety before competition more physically, we might use things like deep breathing, where you're trying to calm the body down slightly. You don't want to become so relaxed that you lay down and take a nap before a game.
Tom Brady did that before. I think it was his first Super Bowl. They said he was taking a nap like an hour before the game.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think people would be amazed if they saw what's happening with some of these athletes right before an event. I think the typical fan or the average fan might think that they're all jumping around and banging heads.
Yeah.
But
because that's the way you feel as a fan.
Yeah, because you're excited.
Yeah.
A lot of these athletes, really kind of depending on their position, those that require more fine motor skills are not doing that. And if there's the sense of a quarterback or a pitcher where there's a large cognitive component to it, they have to process information all the time, where they're usually more low key. They're trying to control their feelings. They're trying to control their physiological responses because they know that being in control and being able to control that's going to help them maintain their mental toughness during the competition.
Absolutely.
So the deep breathing is an example of might help somebody who feels like they're getting a little too worked up. Something we haven't talked about that we talk about in sports psychology in classes with athletes is when you're feeling under aroused, and that would be those instances where you don't feel physically or mentally ready for a competition.
Sure,
you're feeling flat, and that's also a bad thing.
Yeah,
you're not going to have your best performance if you are feeling sluggish. And so we talk about actually sort of deep breathing in the sense of trying to relax yourself, induced breathing where you're trying to hyperventilate sort of the body to energize itself to help get prepared for a competition.
Okay.
We also talk about and help the athletes develop self-talk skills, where we help them recognize negative things that they may say to themselves. And particularly when those negative things are having an adverse effect on their confidence or their concentration or their performance, we obviously want to change those so that's a more positive statement or more positive thought to help, again, refocus their concentration or regain their confidence before a game, before a snap, before a pitch, or before the chute's open, whatever the case may be.
So trying to kind of reprogram themselves instead of saying and visualizing negative things, saying more positive things, visualizing the success rather than what happens if I walk this guy versus visualizing striking him out, or just more positive talk versus negative talk. And so that's a big part of that.
And the visualization aspect, which is something we haven't talked about, which is a large part of what we do in sports psychology, is helping athletes develop their visualization skills. And the idea there is if where the mind goes, the body will follow, hopefully. And if you can see it in your mind's eye of being successful, and I don't mean that by like seeing myself win. I mean seeing myself catching a ball, seeing myself throwing the ball, seeing myself.
So you're not sitting there trying to just visualize yourself holding the trophy up, but throwing the ball in the way that you want it to be thrown, catching it.
You're creating, I call it a mental video. You're the director of your own mental video, and you're directing this perfect performance. And the idea is that psychologically it's helping increase your motivation and your concentration. Physically or performance-wise, it's also ideally in the research and the evidence of athletes would tell us that it helps improve your physical performance too. Okay.
Now, and some of that might be, I would imagine that you could tease that out in two ways. That one is by visualizing a positive, like you said, the body will follow the mind. But also I wonder if it's just by removing the negative aspect of it, then your body is you're able to initiate that control and focus that you need to do it.
In a relaxed state.
In a more relaxed state, rather than having the negative stuff there. My brother always likes to say, if you don't plant flowers, you're going to get weeds. And so, that's more of an aphoristic way of putting it, but I think that's right. So focus on the positives, and then the weeds, the other stuff, the negatives there's no room for it to come up if you're just focused on the positives. And so even if the positives themselves aren't directly having the impact, it's removing the impact of the negative, which might just be that liberating aspect to allow you to succeed. So
I think there's certainly these aspects of the psychological parts of sport or components of sport are all interacting, in terms of your confidence, your concentration, your mental alertness, your anxiety. And so I think one or two of these psychological skills that we help athletes develop, depending on the individual, is going to help, ideally, everything fall into place. So when we say mentally and physically alert, we really mean, my physiological state is such that I'm ready to have my best performance. And also mentally, I'm able to concentrate and focus, and I'm not stressing out in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it helps set an individual up for their best performance.
All right.
Now, if the other team is better, or the officials are horrible,
right,
and or both, those are things that are outside of your control.
Right.
But worrying about those, I always tell the athletes I work with, worrying about all those extrinsic factors outside of you is not going to help you prepare for your best performance.
Right.
There's nothing really that you can do ultimately about those things, but you can do a lot about your own performance, physically and mentally.
Right. Yeah. I think that's an important a thing to get, not just in sport but in life.
Sure.
And that reminds me of just Stoic philosophy of the ancient Greek and Roman philosophic approach that to be virtuous, to have a good life, really, they took it to the extreme of the external doesn't impact that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just what you do, how you being virtuous, have you developed your virtue? If you've done that, then you've done all you need to do,
right.
and that stuff's out of your control. That's probably a little too far.
But I see some parallels between the two.
Yeah, and because Aristotle said, look, if you're really, really ugly, you're just not going to have as good a life, right? He says something like that. That's a bit of a paraphrase, but that idea is there, and I think that's something that's out of your control for the most part, and so there are things, if you're always running into a team that's better, you're always running into bad officiating,
mm-hmm.
then you're not going to be as successful as you would otherwise. But that's going to be on the outskirts, I think, for the most part. Those kinds of things ought to balance out over one's career.
Usually,
you'd hope. It does seem like some players have just keep running into bad luck. So one thing I wanted to come back to, because you mentioned we've talked about a number of different sort of correlated concepts: alertness, self-control, confidence, focus, goals, motivation, commitment. Are there skeptics about the existence of something called resilience, or is it, and they say, well, look, there's all these other things, and so resilience is just a grab bag, mm-hmm. For all these different things. So is there a debate within the profession about the use of this concept, and saying, well, look, don't focus on resilience, focus on these other things, or is that just more semantics?
I don't think so. In fact, I see it. I think especially again looking at the higher levels of sports. At the lower levels of sports, if I'm more physically developed than everybody else, and this is a sport I've been playing for years, and I'm 12 years old, and I'm going to dominate everybody else. Right. And I don't need to be resilient.
Right. This is no challenge. Yeah.
But I think once you get to the varsity level in high school, you get into college level and internationally and above that, I think most everyone's going to agree that mental toughness and resilience is an important part of you being successful. And actually, instead of there being controversy or debate about it, I think you're seeing resiliency in a lot of different aspects professionally, not just in sports psychology, but I mentioned earlier that I have some interest and background in exercise psychology or health psychology, wellness, fitness, even the health. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of recent literature and research looking at the effect of resilience on our overall health, mm-hmm. and quality of life, and they've found that in those people who tend to live longer and have a higher quality of life have been resilient. Mm-hmm. And what they mean by that is the same things we were talking about before, is they focus on trying to work through things that happen in their life and move through them and see them as a challenge, not see them as a threat. Mm-hmm. They feel like they have a sense of control over things that happen. And these are people that, a significant other has died, they've lost a husband, wife, family member, lost a house, bad things have happened, but they've still moved on, and they found that the resilience aspect of their personal makeup has made a major difference in their overall outlook on life as well as their health.
Yeah, and I've heard of research in stress research like that so much of it depends on how you, or at least appears to, so much on how you read it, right? And just like we were talking about, opportunity or loss, right. Or as something that's temporary or something that's permanent,
right?
An opportunity or not, and yeah, people can have really stressful situations and not have it affect them in the way that someone else that it could really, and in other population that views it as more permanent, as more of an attack. You know, there's higher rates of all kinds of diseases in populations that seem to say, okay, no, this is just temporary, move beyond it, or have an acceptance aspect of it and then move beyond it.
And I do think those people who they look at it negatively. I think, I'm not saying that you could teach all of them mental toughness, but I think because these are learned skills, most of these are not, again, things that you're born with, that you can learn with the help of a health professional or a sports psychologist or someone who's well versed in this area. I think they could change their outlook, which could change their overall health. You know, I know there's a genetic predisposition to be 6'6" tall, and there's a genetic predisposition to have cancer, but there's also several other socializations or learning skills or lifestyle choices that we can have an influence and have a sense of control over, that can help improve our plight.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that when I was thinking about this topic was the genetic component to some of this. Now, a lot of it does seem learned, does seem socially acquired. You know, who was, you know, what kind of coaches you had that sort of helped you along to be more resilient, you know, or parents or peers, just having certain situations. I mean, I can imagine someone who has had a lot of success early in their life and they continue to have success, and then they get to high school, college, and now they run into some issues that I could see them, like you're saying, they don't seem to have any need for resilience, so they didn't really develop it. Now suddenly they're thrown in with people who are as good as they are, and that they're not the top anymore. And I think you hear about those people just, you know, folding because they just can't, they don't have the resilience to deal with that challenge at that point.
Do you remember Todd Marinovich? Played for USC back in, maybe the 80s, and then went on to his dad. He was Robo son or Robo quarterback, I believe he was referred to, and it might be a feature of one of the ESPN 30 for 30 features. But he had programmed him to be this professional quarterback, and he went through high school. Yeah, there was a 30 for 30. It sounds familiar. He was one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Went to USC and just, you know, had lots of success, even though he was not your typical quarterback at the time. And then went to the pros, and he had developed physically, but his dad and others, I don't think, from what I know about the story, helped him develop his mental toughness, because when he got to the pros, you know, this is not high school. This is not even the Pac-12. Right. This is a whole different level of other people, and some of them want to rip your head off. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, so there's certainly a large component here that is learned and socialized. Yep. But there are aspects of all of this sort of sub-skills that we talked about that do seem to have some genetic control component. I mean, the idea of self-control, you know, that you certainly a range in which we can learn that, but also we see on the extremes where from various disorders, whether it's things like ADHD and other kinds of things where people have too much control, OCD, I guess, might be thought of that, too little control, and that some of those are genetic, right? Yep. There's, you know, biochemical things going on in the brain that are preventing that. So even in the normal range, probably there's something going on there, but so I wonder, you know, so that's one aspect of it that has some genetic aspect of it, but it does seem to be more socially learned. Are you aware of research that's looked at to how much of this is more innate or genetic versus how much of it is socially learned? Is there talk of that?
Most of what I'm familiar with is looking at it. There are certainly those that look at it from a physiological standpoint or a cognitive standpoint, and because of our biochemistry, that we do have genetic limitations. But even so, within oneself, you can improve yourself oftentimes beyond what you think you're able to accomplish. You know, again, within physical limitations and genetic limitations. But the growth that a person could experience from developing these particular learned skills, you know, it might be overstating it by saying it's across the board, but in most of my experiences and what I know about developing psychological skills, it can help almost anybody. Yeah, and it might be just that the range of the, like you mentioned, the height, right? So that, you know, a certain genetic range that someone's going to be born in. There's certainly environmental aspects, nutrition, and all those things are going to play into what one's height ends up being.
And it might be that the range is just so big here that there's obviously some genetic component because, we have genes, right? And so that's going to be a part of it. But the range might be so big that there's so much of it that's learned that there's, even if there's an upper bound, it might be that most people aren't ever going to even hit that. Even if there is an upper bound or a lower bound to it.
And there certainly are some genetic predispositions to make it difficult for someone to visualize. I've worked with athletes who just don't seem to have the capacity to close their eyes and see something.
Sure.
So you're going to have limitations. You're not going to be able to help them develop that skill as much as you would someone else who, their brain allows them to create a very elaborate mental video. So I do think that, mentally, cognitively, there will be some limitations based on genetics.
Yeah, and it might just be that there are alternative methodologies there, alternative techniques. Instead of visualizing, maybe you're more verbal, so you're using more words in it. Right? Or there's maybe there's music that you can, that affects you at an emotional level that either in a positive or negative sense. So there might be all kinds of other techniques.
And their realistic goals will be different based on their particular situation.
Cool. So we still got about 5 minutes.
Okay.
So
we're not going to talk about the Patriots for the next 5 minutes, are we?
We could. Okay. Won't go there.
Sorry, I shouldn't have started.
Although I think it's related to this and some of what we talk about when a quarterback throws a touchdown. Sometimes when we talk about some quarterbacks, someone like Tom Brady and I think, Andrew Luck, they throw an interception. And sometimes you hear that, they have this ability to forget.
Yeah.
And then the next play, it wouldn't be the next play if it's an interception, but their next set of offensive downs, they come out as if they didn't throw an interception. And it's not part of it. Where some, if you can, I think some quarterbacks like an Eli Manning or sometimes you get them to throw that first one, you're going to get 4 or 5 more, right? And it does seem like they don't have that ability to forget. Yeah. And I wonder, is that part of the resilience as well? Ability to forget is more of a colloquialism, but that seems more like a kind of again, kind of an acceptance of just, okay, I threw it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to throw it again. Yeah. And so it's back to that confidence, that sense of falling back to your practice, knowing that that's just part of the game sometimes.
Yeah. I always think that quarterbacks, defensive backs, and pitchers have to have some of the shortest short-term memory or shortest long-term memory that you can have to be successful, because you're going to throw an interception. The wide receiver, tight end you're covering is going to catch a touchdown. You're going to throw a home run pitch.
All right. You're going to fail.
You are.
Yeah, in an instant.
Batters. Batters strike out. All right. Even good batters, great batters, strike out 7 out of 10 times.
Right.
So you have to be able to develop, again, I think going back to those components of resilience and mental toughness, the commitment and the confidence, which I think a big part of that, going back to the quarterback example, is at least somewhat, if not in large part, related to concentration skills. We talk about in sports psychology these 4 components of concentration, and one of them is this area where you're analyzing what's going on or what's happening, but you don't want to spend too much time in that area. You want to think about what's happened or what what situation, what defense you're facing, but then you need to be able to move out of that area of concentration into the performance stage. And I'm not thinking so much now any longer. I'm performing.
Fall back on your practice. I know how to do this, and just let the body take it.
The motor learning researchers would say this is why we practice, because when you get to games, you shouldn't be thinking. You should just rely on what we've been doing. And I think they need to be able to move out of that area of analysis of thinking, okay, now what happened when I threw that, or what happened when I got beat on that pass, or what happened when I threw that home run ball, and say, okay, I did the best I could, so I'm going to move on to the next thing. I'm going to move out of that area.
Was there any obvious mistake? I don't see an obvious mistake. Okay, well,
he got me.
He got me that time, and move on.
Yeah, or I didn't get it as far inside as I wanted to, or I shouldn't have turned my hips. In the case of the defensive back, I bought on that fake, and he's been giving me that fake for the last 3 plays, and I finally bit on it, and he burned me on it. So I think being able to process that, but then move out of that. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck in that, and you've probably heard this before, the paralysis by analysis. Yep. You're going to get in that area of concentration where you're focusing too much on what's happened or what's happening. And in sports, there's too large of a physical component for you to spend too much time in that area of concentration.
Right. Yeah, you just just get you're paralyzed.
Yeah.
I'm always just amazed that with, like you mentioned, pitchers, kickers, a field goal kicker.
Tough job.
That is, I can't even imagine that, because you get so little respect as a kicker to begin with
from the coach. From everybody.
From everybody that you play with.
Yeah, they would rather not see you on the field.
Right, but then so many of their games come down to you performing your job, and
Patriots are a good example.
Yeah, Vinatieri all those years, and it's just been. We won all those Super Bowls pretty much because of at least in part because of Vinatieri's kicks. But no one would ever consider giving him the MVP.
Yeah, right. No, certainly not,
and probably shouldn't, even because it was still Brady got him into position to do that.
Right,
but yeah, to have that. You want that focus, that ability to forget the moment in a way.
Yeah.
To forget everything rides on this.
Yeah.
My whole career, the whole narrative of who I am as a player rides on this at this very moment. Because I'm just imagining, a closer in the game that could close out the World Series, and thinking that, if I strike this guy out, we win the World Series, I'm the best ever. If we don't, then I'm a GOAT. And it's just you're right on that line and the knife's edge, and it goes one way or the other. There's no in between. There's no well, you did good. You lost, but you did good. No, it's you're a GOAT or a hero, and they have to know that at some level, and that they also block that out. That's that process that's amazing to me.
They do, and I think when you listen to the post game interviews afterwards, when they had that success, and the interviewer is asking these questions of is this what you were thinking about? Were you dreaming about this happening? And in many cases, I look at them and I can tell that what's happened hasn't quite sunk in yet. In fact, a lot of them will say that. That hasn't quite sunk in yet. It hasn't, because they weren't thinking about the big picture.
Right.
They were thinking about putting the ball where the catcher's calling for it or where I want to put it, and I'm hoping or I'm confident that's going to be the strikeout pitch, and that's it.
Right.
That's the only thing I'm thinking about right now. Yes, ultimately that will help us win the game, which might help us win the World Series, but I can't be thinking about that right now. That's too much of a burden on my shoulders at this instance.
That sort of laser-focused vision of just that pitch, this play, this set of downs. That's it. Not thinking about where this fits into the universe. It's just this. Everything else doesn't exist. It's just this play. What's going on now, and succeed at that, and not worry about anything else.
And that's something that you don't have, or you don't develop right then in Game 7 of the World Series. That's something that most successful athletes have had the opportunity, some shape, size, or form, to develop over the course of their careers. Either they've met someone, or if they've been in college, they've taken a sports psychology class, or their coach is experienced with sports psychology through training and education and has helped develop those skills. Yeah. And that's, again, those are higher level athletes. Somewhere along the line have learned to develop their mental toughness. They may call it something else, they may approach it different ways, but in order to help them continue to succeed and perform under pressure like that, in the case of Vinatieri, for example, or your World Series pitchers, or batters for that matter, they have learned to develop that mental toughness along the way. Their goal setting, their visualization, their ability to be able to manage their pre-performance anxiety, being able to be take negative experiences and set them aside for now and focus just on this one thing, or keeping a positive mental attitude. In almost every case, at that higher level, if you were to talk with them and have a chance to talk, how did you do that? I would bet in almost all cases will talk about developing their the mental side, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And one thing we're not going to have time to get into, but that is, at these elite levels and professional levels, the fact that there are players, athletes that are there that are lacking in the mental toughness. That's always so surprising.
Yes.
And you can get into the debate about, well, are there guys who choke, guys who are clutch, and whether that exists or not. But there certainly is some people, people make mental mistakes in those big moments, and those may just be execution errors. They may not be a failure of mental toughness, but sometimes they might be. And that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, me too.
And so we'll have to just close with the readers doing homework and thinking about that. Listeners, I guess.
Food for thought.
Food for thought. All right. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
This has been the Sports Ethicist Show. You can find us at sportsethicist.com, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can email the show at sportsethicist@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.